Hey folks, thanks for checking out my Photoshop tutorial. This is intended for people who don't have any experience with Photoshop, really. I'm gonna teach you in a slightly different way than a lot of tutorials online do. I want this to be sort of goal-based around things that I actually try to accomplish in Photoshop, and you can see how I do it and how I get there. But first, I guess we have to introduce you to Photoshop in general if you're new to it. So, right here I have a photo open that I took. It's not a perfect photo, but we're going to try to make it a little more perfect today. I do product photography, so this is advertising this thing here that holds a tablet or a phone. And it's, by the pretty colors and stuff, it's marketed towards kids. So my friend's daughter modeled for me. And here we go. So we have two photos. Let's see, where can we start? So I think you first need to know the tool. Here's the thing. I can't teach you everything about Photoshop because it's used so much in so many different ways. I happen to be a photographer, so I use it a lot with photos. I used to have a job where I used it to design like posters and event promos. So you could do design with it, you can retouch photos. There's people that paint on it, do digital paintings that are unbelievable. So there's so many different approaches to Photoshop, and it's really just a tool that lets you do whatever you want visually with photos or pictures of any kind. So for me, this is going to be mostly photography-based tutorials. I'm going to be retouching stuff, making pictures just a little bit better, fixing flyaway hairs like this. This hair on this thing here. I'm going to erase the Kindle brand because, we don't want to advertise another brand for this product. Fix up the table, things like that. Flyaways, maybe brighten up the background a little. And because this is a kid's product, or a product aimed at kids, I figure it's probably not a good idea to have these wine bottles back here. So we're going to erase this entire shelf thing. It's going to be gone. That's going to be easy because it's all a white wall. So where we start is probably, I guess, the tools is where, you got to have a foundation. So the first tool is just an arrow, just for moving stuff around. This layer is our background layer. We're going to talk about layers in a minute, but background layer is locked by default. So we can't move this around unless we make some changes, but don't worry about that. Then you have a box for selections. We're going to be doing a lot of selecting later, but probably not any boxes. But this, you want to select an area of an image, copy it, paste it to somewhere else. Or if you want to, let's say, what I do a lot is, let's say you wanted to paint this wall here, but you want to paint the white, like, edge of the wall, but not the wall itself. So you do something like this to protect the wall, because if you pick a color and paint, you can only paint inside of the selection. So that way you don't paint where you don't want to paint. Once you have a selection, what you can do is flip it. So instead of everything inside of the box, we can work on the outside of the box. And the way you do that, there's multiple ways. We can go to select and inverse. And now, as you can see, we have everything but this blue area selected. So if we were to paint yellow, green, whatever, this way, we're not doing anything in here. So that's the basics of selection. What do we have next? Lasso. Okay, the lasso is a way to select freeform areas, like that. Same thing as the box. Selection is a selection, but you can sometimes do, you select your ear, or all kinds of things. If you click and hold, so you see a lot of these tools have a tiny little triangle in the bottom right corner, and that means there's more tools underneath. We're not going to go through all of them. Some of them I don't use ever, but if we look at the move tool, it also has artboards, which we're not going to go into. You don't need to know that. Selection, you can select circular things, ellipses. If you want a perfect circle, hold shift, and you'll get a perfect circle as opposed to, an oval. Control A, select. So here's the thing. I use a lot of keyboard shortcuts. Most people that are very comfortable with a program prefer to use keyboard shortcuts because it's a lot faster, and after a while it becomes second nature. So I'm going to try my best to tell you about all the keys that I'm hitting, because I don't usually go up here, to these things, these menu options, because I know the keyboard shortcuts. So in this case, Control A copies the entire, selects the entire image, and Control D deselects it. So I use those a lot. We're going to use that actually in a second. You'll see why. So under the lasso tool, you have the polygonal lasso tool. So this allows you, I use this one actually pretty often. This is, instead of just a freehand drawing, you do lines. So say you go here, you click once down here, and then you go up here, click, 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 click. You get the idea. And so that can be, you have a little more control for certain things. It's a little iffy with curvy shapes because, this is a straight line on a curve. That's not great, but in certain situations, it's pretty good. Magnetic lasso, I never really use that. The way that works is it sort of snaps to edges. So if you just kind of draw in the vicinity of an edge, like, see, it doesn't work great. It sort of snaps to it. But it's not something I ever use, really. Okay, Control D to deselect everything. Next we have these more selection tools, actually. Quick Selection, which is a relatively new feature in Photoshop. They probably added it with CC. I don't think they had it when I was like learning Photoshop in high school or whatever. But this is kind of like the magnetic lasso, except think of it more like a brush. So say you want to select the iPad, you kind of just, just like that. It realized what I was doing and selected the iPad for me, just based on, the color black, basically, is how the computer reads it. And it sees that you're trying to select an object that's mostly black. So it finds the edges for you, but it didn't get this part because obviously this isn't connected. So you would have to select that separately. With this tool, you just paint, you just click when you want to add things, right? And if you want to, let's say you select this whole furniture thing, but you decide, I don't want that, or the computer selected it without, it did it for you and you didn't want that to be part of the selection. You hold Alt on the keyboard and you'll see the plus sign turns, let me make that bigger. Plus sign turns into, there we go, sorry. Plus sign turns into, a minus sign. So you say, no, I don't want this part. And it starts to cut it off. You say, I don't want this part. I don't want this. And you're back to just the iPad. Now, I should have mentioned this before, but let's say you're back with these tools. You're doing the rectangle, right? Control T to start over. So you select, let's pretend this Kindle's a perfect square. You select this, and then there's some other thing over here that you want to select. So you go click it, and what happened to my first selection? So what happens in those cases is you hold Shift, and you see how our selection tool gets a happy little plus sign next to it. So now you can select two things at once. And similarly, if you hold Alt, you get a minus sign. You could say, I don't want this part, and it cuts it out. You don't have to do that with the quick selection brush. You don't have to hold any keys. All right, next tool, what do we got? Magic Wand. This is kind of sucks. It used to be used, it's like something I used to use too much, and it's something you use when you don't really know what you're doing. But it selects, similar to the other one, it selects, the same colors, but not in a smart way, not where it detects edges. It just says like, okay, this color is the same mostly everywhere. If you lower the tolerance up here, for all these tools, you'll have more options up here in this area. I don't know what these areas are called, but up here. So if you lower the tolerance, it has to be like the exact shade of orange or nothing else will get selected, right? But if you up the tolerance, then it becomes a lot more lenient and it says like, all right, this is all generally, pretty much the same shade. Or you up it a little more. Let's see, maybe, now it gets too much, it goes a little crazy. The other part of this that is important is contiguous. So this little check mark, what that means is the parts have to be touching. So you select this color and you get all this, but you're not getting anything down here, right? Because this is separate. So if you uncheck contiguous, then yeah, you get stuff all over the image. That shade of orange is present all over the place. But usually, most often, you're going to use contiguous. Next, cropping. Everyone knows what cropping is. You do it on Instagram or whatever. That's basically all there is to it. You have some options up here if you want a perfect, 2x3 photo, which is most, printed photos. The normal ones are 4x6 inches. That's a 2x3 ratio. So here it is. If you want to lock it to that, say you want, 3x2, you just hit this arrow and you flip the numbers clear. Then you can do whatever ratio you feel like. Other handy tools for this. Usually you want to have delete crop pixels off. So in this case, if you crop it like this, hit enter or hit this check mark. Oh, I cropped it. And then I decide, nah, I didn't really want it that way. I want it a little different. You still can go back and change it because delete crop pixels was not checked. This is taking a little while because I have content aware checked. Oh my God, what did it do? That thing can be a little bit of a monster. Okay, content aware is something we're gonna encounter a few times. It's this incredible algorithm that Photoshop creators have made where it can actually fill in data in places where there is none. It can look at the surrounding area and figure out like what should go there. So let's say this photo, it's a little crooked. It's not, but let's say it is, right? And I say, okay, I want it more like, I don't know, like that. But I want to get a little more table because I want this area for whatever reason. If you have content aware clicked on, it will do some magic. Takes a little second because this is a pretty big photo. And it will fill in that area with table. It's crazy, but very useful for things like that. So let's go back to the start. Oh, I gotta talk about that too. Should we take a little detour and talk about the way I like to set up my Photoshop? I think we should. So when you open Photoshop on your computer, it might not look exactly like this. Some things might be a little different. Maybe your tools are in 2 rows side by side. You probably have different stuff on the right side, or maybe you don't have anything. Maybe it looks like that or something. So this is all very customizable. And you're gonna find ways to work that you like. The way that I like and the way I would suggest to go forward, I'm always comfortable with having my layers down here, and then these windows, if you don't have them, if you don't see them on your screen, they're all under window, right? So I have history checked and layers and options and tools. So history to me is vital. These are all the steps that I did, in this video. Not all of them, but it goes back pretty far, right, to the circle marquees that we were doing earlier. So you can go back to a previous day. You can travel in time. It's fantastic. However, so in most programs like Word or whatever, Control Z is undo, right? So you do something wrong and you hit Control Z and it's gone. You took a step backwards. In Photoshop, it's kind of the same. By default, if you hit Control Z, it undoes, and if you hit Control Z again, it redos. So you go back a step and then forward a step. I don't like that. That's not how most programs work. I like to keep hitting undo and make my way back through time, just like that, through all the steps. So to do that on your computer, you have to go to Edit. It's in, I think, Keyboard Shortcuts. Yeah, Keyboard Shortcuts. There we go. So let's see, Edit. So on your computer, Control Z is going to be mapped to undo redo, but I change it so that Control Z is mapped to step backward, and that steps backward through the history, backward through time, and then Shift Control Z to go back forward if you want to go back to the future. That's how you do that. So that's how I like to set this up. You don't have to do that, but I find it helpful. All right, let's get back on track. So, other tools. Perspective crop, don't worry about any of it. This stuff is too advanced. Don't worry about that. Eyedrop. So the eyedrop does what you probably expect. It samples colors. So if you see there in this circle, on the bottom is the color that you had selected last, and the top is the gray that you're gonna select if you release the mouse button, right? If you drag it over to the orange over here, it'll be orange. And if you release, boom, now we have that orange over here. If you hit Alt, you can save a secondary color back here. If you decide you want to flip these two, you can click this arrow. Very handy. So what I don't usually go over here because you don't need to. When you're, let's say you're painting with a brush or something, if you just hold Alt, it'll turn into the eyedropper. So then you can sample a color and do it that way. So that's how I, use the eyedropper. All right, let's go back to the beginning. So in this history window, the very top thingy is the file when you opened it, like before you did anything. And then after that, it saves the last like 100 steps or something. That you can configure in the preferences. Oh, that's actually a good point. If you go back in time to an earlier step and then you do something, like you paint or something, everything after that step is gone forever. So, be careful. Oh shoot, what did I do? Oh, this thing didn't. All right, every now and then I break the whole interface. Just go to Arrange, Workspace, Essentials. I didn't fix it. Wow, this is really embarrassing. Okay, come on. What do I gotta do here? Shit, that's even worse. No, that there, and this here. Oh, there we go. So you want it to snap to that blue area. Boom. Good, back on track. CD select. Okay, one of my favorite tools. This little band-aid here. It's actually a couple tools. We'll start with this one. Man, this girl, she's 3, so she has perfect skin. But, okay, there's a hair in her face. So the spot healing tool, you'll see there's a spot healing and a regular healing. Spot healing is amazing. It's, let's say you have, let's say that this was a horrible pimple. It's definitely not, but let's say it is. One click, boom, it's gone. That freckle, out of here. You can also draw lines. So this hair, Isn't that amazing? So Photoshop looks at the surrounding pixel data and just fills in the missing part. Now, once you get to more complicated areas like this, it's not going to be as perfect. It's actually pretty bad. But if you have a blemish on top of smooth skin, that is the easiest thing in the world to fix. That's also how we would get rid of this, branding. Super easy. Boom, done. And this too. So the spot healing is just click and drag, and it looks at the surrounding pixels of the area surrounding where you clicked, right? So it's looking right here. If I were to click here, it's looking at what's in this general area. But every now and then you want to sample from a different area of the photo. So that's when you use the healing brush tool, because with the healing brush tool, if you hold Alt, you can pick a target, right? Like this rose over here. Just Alt and click. It doesn't do anything, but it got it. And then you can bring that rose, or at least the sort of pattern it has, over here. And okay, on black, it's not really. Let's do a better example. So if I copy this hair texture and paint it on her forehead, holy shit. Oh, you know why it's doing this? I have my thing on replace. It should be on normal. If you do it on normal, see, that's what it does. It copies the texture, but it keeps the underlying colors and brightness. It just copies the texture. You might say, when am I ever going to do that? Well, it happens, believe me. So here, if we were to do the rose again, and see, it's copying this is a terrible example, I'm so sorry. Let's go back. Just wanted to say, oh yeah, so by default you're going to be on normal, but sometimes later on you'll see that we switch it to replace. I didn't know this was here until literally like 2 days ago, and it makes such a difference. So there's a bazillion things in Photoshop, and you're never going to get them all, but if you know enough to do your job, then you're good. Okay, so the brush is the next. Let's talk about these other things. The patch tool, we will. I don't think I'll use it, but I'll show you how it works. Patch tool is kind of a combination of lasso and spot healing, or irregular healing. So with the patch tool, you select oh shoot, what is this doing? Oh, I accidentally hit P and went to the pen tool. I don't want that. I want my patch. Patch, let's say we select this eye, right? Beautiful eye. You click and drag to another area. Oh shit, her eye's gone. So that's pretty amazing. Like the healing tool, it copies the texture but keeps the underlying, stuff. Unless, of course, you switch it to, never mind, replace is not an option. So you have content aware. What does that do? Let's see. Okay, cool. Let's move on. What else? Content aware move tool. I don't know what that is. Red eye tool. If you have red eyes, you probably just like do something like that, and I'm sure it fixes it like in a click. Brushes. Okay. So brush we will use a little bit in retouching because I like to paint some stuff. Like for example, when I'm over here getting rid of this thing, I'm gonna sample this wall color and paint over it. So actually that leads me to a good thing. So these options are vital for brushes. So here, if you click that arrow, you have the size of the brush, right? Big brush. Whoa, too big. You get what I mean. And the hardness, which is very, very important. So sometimes you want a hard edge. Wow, worst color ever. Hard edge. But sometimes you want a very soft edge, right? It all depends. And usually I don't go, I go to 0 all the time, but I usually don't go to 100 because most things in photography and pictures are not that sharp. So I'll go to like 96 or something, and you get, hard, but not like, artificially hard. It looks like that could really be there. I don't know if that makes any sense. Okay, what else about brushes? Opacity, important. The opacity is how see-through your brush stroke is. So 100% opacity, you're not seeing through that. But if you lower it to like 10 or 20, so you see how that works. Flow is kind of like opacity. I would suggest as a beginner, you just leave it at 100. I can't even explain the difference really, and it's sort of a feel thing. I'm sure you could Google it if you really care. This thing is if you were using a drawing tablet, it will read the sensitivity of how hard you're pressing on your tablet, which is great for digital artists and stuff. They do that all the time, but you don't need that for what we're doing. So keep that off. Smoothing, if perchance, and by the way, if this is grayed out for you, you should open the brush settings, I think. Brush settings window, right? Which for me is right here, but for you it might not be. And make sure smoothing's clicked on if this is grayed out up here. What smoothing does, it doesn't smooth the brush, it smooths your hand motion. So, ordinarily, let's say you're trying to draw like a really sweet curve, you might be like, and that looks like a kid's finger paint, right? But if you, why can't I undo this? What is going on? Okay. But if you turn smoothing on, it's a little hard to describe. You'll have to try this for yourself. What it does, there's sort of a delay. You see how it's painting sort of behind where my brush actually is? And the further away, the higher the smoothing is, the further away that sort of delay is. And the result is that you can draw a much nicer curve. I'm not great at it because I don't do that much, but that's what that does. So we'll turn that back to 0 because normally we don't need that. Next up, pencil, something I never really use. The pencil tool draws with very hard edges. I think now it has hardness. It didn't have that back in my day. No, it's still, I don't know. The pencil tool is not for me. That thing sucks. We're not going to use that. Color replacement tool, I don't know how that works. Ignore that. I'm sure it's cool, but I don't know how it works. Clone stamp, that's a big one. Clone stamp is kind of like the Band-Aid tool, but it's a little more literal. So, if with the, where's my Band-Aid? It's under one of these things, right? Here. With the Band-Aid tool, if I were to select the eye as a target and draw up here, it would do that, which is, not an exact copy of the eye. It's just sort of copying the texture and whatever. The clone stamp is an exact copy. So you copy the eye, you're going to get the eye. And it's at low opacity. Hold on. Boom. Eye. So sometimes, every now and then, you're going to want to copy something exactly, especially when you're fixing hair and stuff like that. And sometimes when you're fixing hair, lowering the opacity does help a little bit. So you pick an area that's like, pretty smooth, and then you copy it over to an area that's kind of, janky and looks terrible. Hardness down. And okay, more bad examples, but I think you understand what I'm going for. Next, pattern stamp tool. I don't know what that is. Art history or history. Let's do history. I don't know what art history is. I thought it was called art history, but that's a different thing. So we did all these things, right? With the art history tool, if you look up in your history, you see the same icon is up here next to the snapshot of how the photo looked when we first opened it, right? So that is what the history brush paints. It paints exactly what was there at, in this case, this stage, right? So if I go over the eye, that wasn't there back then when we were at this stage. So the eye is now gone. I don't have many other changes done. But, well, here, the hair that I completely messed up. You can go back to how it used to be, back to the good old days, right? And you can, fade it out and just do a little bit of the good old days peeking through. And maybe you want to do that. So that's handy. And that icon up here, you can put it somewhere else. So, if you want to go back to this stage for whatever reason, you can do that. Be careful if you crop the image, you won't be able to edit anything before that crop using this brush. It'll tell you can't do it. The photo's not the same size that it used to be. I don't know what to do. So that's not an option. So keep that in mind. Skip art history. Eraser is not something I use a lot. We're going to go over why later, but it works the same as the brush. It's got all the same things. It's got size, it's got hardness. I don't know what that does. Opacity. You can use your tablet with it. Excuse me. You can smooth. Same thing as a brush. Why did it paint gray? Because that's the only layer we have, and gray, don't worry about it. It's the eraser erases. Don't use it generally. I'm going to show you why later. Okay, paint bucket. That if you used MS Paint, you know what the paint bucket does. It fills in a whole area at once. Gradient. You can guess what that. If you don't know what a gradient is, it's like a ramp, or like what else do they call it? Like ombre or whatever. So by default, it'll take these two colors and make a gradient for you. But let's say you want to make something else. You can just double click it. Wait for your computer to not do what you want it to do. What the hell? It's probably a RAM issue, I'm gonna say. All right, anyway, you double click it and you can make a gradient of whatever colors you want, as many steps as you want. So the rainbow one has a bunch of steps. And as you can see by the examples, you can also go from full opacity to low opacity or zero opacity. So you can make a color completely fade away, like this orange. Do something, let's jack the opacity up. 2 is a little low. So you see how it goes from orange to zero opacity fade. So that can be pretty handy if you combine it with some other things in retouching photos. Maybe we'll get there one day. One day. 3D material drop, I don't know what that is. Blur tool. I don't really use that too much, but sometimes you copy something and you paste it and the edge is just a little too hard. It's too clear of a defined edge and it doesn't really look real. So sometimes I'll blur the edge using the blur tool, just kind of like a brush. Sharpen is the opposite. Doesn't work too great. If you have a blurry photo, sharpen is not going to work miracles on it. It's just for little things that you want to pop a little more. For example, like say I wanted the Kindle logo here to be a little more evident, I might go over it with the sharpen tool. It adds a lot of noise, unfortunately. But let's see, let's go over a little more. Does that make any difference? Yeah, see? So there it's a little more evident. So there's a use case for that. Smudge, I don't use. It smudges. I don't know. I'm sure there's a use for it. I don't know what it is. Okay, these are very important. So dodge and burn. You may be wondering, why does this look like a lollipop? And why is this guy making the OK symbol where you punch somebody in the arm when they look at it? These things date back to old school film photography. So in film photography, when you are developing an image, the more light that hits the image or hits the photographic paper that you're using, the more light that hits it, the darker that spot gets, right? So let's say you wanted to make her face a little lighter for some reason, right? You would use, if you were in a lab, in a dark room, you would use like a stick with like a circular piece of cardboard or something just to block the light from going here, right? And by doing that, you prevent the light from hitting the paper and turning black, so it stays white. So dodge makes things lighter. That's basically the bottom line here. Dodge makes things lighter. The exposure, you usually want to have it under 10 for the most control, you know. Again, over here you have the same options with size and hardness as with the brush. So if you go to like 50, that sounds like a normal amount. No, 50 is crazy. Don't do 50. Do like 4, 6, 8, you know, that area. And then you can sort of brush something to be gradually brighter. The range is kind of a Pandora's box here, but you see you have 3 options: shadows, midtones, and highlights. All images, or at least all photos, usually have those 3 sort of areas. So the shadows in this photo, for example, would be, you know, the darkest areas of the photo. This darkness back here, and her ears, and the dark windows, and blah 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 blah. The midtones are kind of the middle, you know, middle nothings, and the highlights are the brightest areas. So her shirt's really bright, and her face, and you know, this thing over here. So usually, not always, but usually when I'm dodging, when I'm making things brighter, I target the highlights because I want the brights to be brighter. You know, not that much. That is too much because we are on 44%. And that, as I said before, is crazy. I hope this is recording, is it? Yeah. Okay, so exposure, and let's leave it at 4. And you can just slowly bring it brighter. Brighter window. Brighter wine bottle. Slowly. But see, the wine bottle is mostly dark. The only thing that's being affected, because we selected highlights, is that white label on it. But the bottle itself is not getting brighter. If we switch to midtones and turn this up a little for demonstration purposes, And we see that we're affecting the things, but the black areas are not getting brighter. If we switch to shadows, then the black areas get brighter. So, but usually, like I said, I'm only brightening the highlights because that's how you make things really pop. You know, that's too much. But that's how you sort of make things. The eye is kind of drawn to the brightest parts of an image. So if you wanted to have people focus on her face, for example, you would just brighten that up a little bit, and you'll see it has a little more pop to it than it did before. Burn. So burn is the opposite. If you wanted an area to be darker, you would make a circle with your hand so you could block everything except for the area that you want to really blast with light, right? The light goes through the circle that you're making with your hand. So the more light that hits the paper, the darker it gets, and burn equals dark. I know it's not intuitive if you've never been in a dark room, and I didn't know what the hell these symbols were until I was like halfway through college, but now you know. Burn and dodge are darken and lighten, respectively. And you can target, so how I how I dodge the highlights, I usually burn the shadows, the opposite. Because again, it makes things, whoa, holy shit. It makes things just a little more, it's even 1% is a little too strong for this, but you get the idea. And protect tones, if it's doing like funky things to your colors, protect tones can sometimes prevent that, but it's not great. The pen tool is too advanced. We're not going to get into it. That's a whole thing, and you don't really need to know it. Text, this would be if you are designing posters or whatever. Here's your text tool. There's all the, here are your fonts, which are not loading because I'm low on, oh, there we go. I'm kind of low on RAM, I guess. Size, everything you want for your text is up here. Justify and all that. One important thing with text, if you want to keep the text to a confined area, you don't want it to just keep going and going and going, you can draw a box with the text tool. And then when you type, it will automatically line break. And one thing I hate is that by default, it hyphenates. And I hate that. I hate hyphens. So to fix that, you actually have to open not the text. So there's two things that work with the text tool. The paragraph window, where hyphenate is checked by default, unfortunately. And then for more advanced text things like kerning, if you know what that is, which is the spaces between the letters, or what is it, leading? I don't know what the other one is called, that is the spaces between the lines. For that type of stuff, you want to go to character, which is this option here for me, because I have these sort of docked here because I use them a lot, not for photos, but for other stuff. So here you have like this, let's see, does it say what it's called? Yeah, leading. See, I'm smart. That separates the lines. And metric, I don't know what that does. This is the spaces between letters. And this is like, if you have a paragraph, then it'll make no, I'm wrong. It's supposed to like make one letter big. I don't know. If you want to do this, like that's another tutorial. That's for another day. It also includes, if you're using a font that doesn't by default have like bold and italics, it will fake it for you with these things that are disabled for some reason. Oh man, this tutorial is going great. What else? Yeah, shortcuts for, let's change this to like Arial. So right now it's on, is this all caps? Yeah, all caps. But I actually type that in lowercase. But there's that handy shortcut where if you type in lowercase, you could be like, oh, I actually wanted that in caps. Boom. Or small caps, which small caps is like if I type my name, John, it will turn the capital letter into a big capital letter and the lowercase letters into smaller lowercase letters. That's why it's called small caps. Then you have superscript, which is text that goes up here, like degrees and other things, and subscript, which goes down here if you're a chemist. And what else? Fake italics. Now we have it. Fake italics, faux italics, and fake bold for those fonts that for some reason do not come in italic and bold, which is over here, by the way. A lot of information I'm throwing at you, I know. Let's delete that. Anything else before we move on? This is another one we're going to skip. You don't need that. Rectangles and circles and stuff. This is for graphic design mostly. You can guess what it does. It draws a rectangle. Let's see, what do you need to know about this? These blending modes, that's a topic for another day. Leave it on normal for now. They're very helpful. It's a great tool, but it's too advanced for right now. I thought that you could feather the edges by default. I guess not. All right, doesn't matter. You also have a rounded rectangle, you know, and here you can pick the radius of the rounded corners. So, yeah, if you want really small rounded corners. Ooh, so small. Or really big rounded corners, whatever. Similar things with the ellipse. The ellipse, just like the ellipse selection or ellipse marquee tool, you know, you draw an ellipse, but if you want a perfect circle, you hold shift. Polygon, don't really use that, but you can draw like, you know, 5-sided. You can draw a pentagon, or you can draw a octagon, or a triangle. Yeah, it's amazing what Photoshop can do. Hand tool, that is, that's something I use all the time, but I don't go here to use it. When I am zoomed in, the hand tool is what you use to move around. But going over here and clicking on it all the time would be a huge pain in the ass. So let's say I am brushing or whatever, and I'm doing some brushing. You just hold space temporarily, you have the hand tool, and you can move, and then release space, and you're back to brushing. So that's, space is always gonna be the hand tool shortcut. Way easier than going over here and clicking it every time. And with the zoom, another thing, which, you know, I zoom in and out all the time. If you're just starting, you can do it from here, you know, click to zoom in, alt click to zoom out. Alt in general is usually does the opposite of whatever tool you selected. But yeah, that's a pain in the ass to keep going over here and clicking the little magnifying glass. So if I am working over here, you will have to remember these shortcuts. Control plus for zooming in and Control minus for zooming out. It will become second nature after a while. Likewise with the brush, if you look at your keyboard for a second, you can change the size of the brush with the open and close brackets that are right under your plus sign, kind of by your backspace, above your enter. So these brackets will change the size. And I think, is it Control? No, Alt? No, breaking everything. There is a shortcut for quickly changing the hardness, but I actually don't know what it is. I would have to look that up. But what I do all the time is change the size with the keys. What's down here? You can edit your toolbar. I've never done that in my life. And we have some quick masking, which we don't need to go over right now, and a few different screen modes, which you can, what the hell is this? Yeah, shut up, go away. If you hit F, just plain old F, you will cycle through the different screen modes. Sometimes you want to go super full screen, but I really don't. I got a big monitor anyway. But just keep pressing F and you'll go through all 3 of the screen modes, or you can go over here and select them. So I think that is it for the tools. We have so much more to learn, but one thing at a time. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you think I went too fast or I'm just a horrible teacher, which is possible. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free. All right, thanks for watching and see you in the next one.